Welcome to Richplanet TV. I'm Richard D. Hall. Now on this show we have challenged the mainstream's version of history, and today we are going to talk about the history of physics and discuss claims that the holy grail of physics, the unified field theory, was discovered in the 18th century. Here to put forward his case is Roger Anderton. Welcome, Roger.
Thank you, Richard. Thanks for having me.
Okay, now just tell us a bit about yourself, Roger, and what first made you interested in physics?
Well, I think I've always been interested in physics. May go back to the time when Doctor Who scared me and I hid behind the settee. My career is, I basically had a try at doing A-levels and physics and maths, and sort of like found it too difficult and didn't carry on there. Then I became a British telecom engineer.
Right.
And I got all the technical qualifications, like in telecommunications and computers and things like that. And you were doing things like physics and so forth. And so later on during my career, I went on to Open University and did physics and maths in Open University. And I was then looking for carrying on for, say, other things like postgraduate.
Right.
But I then found what I'd been taught wasn't correct.
Right. All right. So, and you call that the history that's taught in schools Whig history?
That's right. Yeah.
Just explain what Whig history means.
Whig was an old political party, and when they present history, they present it distorted as per their political bias, and so now it's a general term for a history which has got a biased point of view on it. And so it's really a false history. So if you want, and so when you go to university or get things like that, they teach you a false history of science, and they justify that by saying that makes it easier then to understand what they're trying to teach you from the theory and the experiments. You find out the true history is completely different to what they're teaching you when you're doing your science courses. And I'll have an example from this person here about
occultism and the atom, the curious story of isotopes.
Yeah, this historian has found that when you've gone back into the history of this subject, what they were doing, they were working from the occult philosophy in the early 20th century when they were doing isotopes, but because that was not respectable to believe and that sort of thing, they created a bogus history of what they were actually doing.
And you would contend that a lot of history taught in schools is Whig history?
It's just distorted of what really happened.
Right. Now, Newton and Einstein are two of the big figures in physics. Newton lived in the from 1643 to 1727. Einstein 1879 to 1955. Yeah. Now, you think that these two guys were probably less important than people have made them out to be, and that there are people who've been almost forgotten about, such as Tesla, for example.
Yeah, that's right. Tesla was very impressive. Before Einstein suddenly became famous, a lot of emphasis was on Tesla, what Tesla was doing, and sort of like Einstein, sort of when he became famous, sort of like overshadowed all the amazing things that Tesla was doing. Right. In his discoveries, you've got discoveries in Tesla which sort of like pretty astounding if you really believe them, but they try to divert onto Einstein.
And in one of your lectures you show a film, a modern day film where Tesla is portrayed. What's the name of that film, Roger?
Prestige.
Right, and just tell us.
It's a good film, but it's only fantasy. It has David Barry portraying Tesla, and there's several. Well, David Barry is quite amazing actor, and he's done a film, what's The Man Who Fell to Earth, and I kind of think the way he portrayed Tesla is sort of like an alien as well, because there's an amazing scene where he's walking through lightning, and that is kind of like an alien coming towards you. Right. And Tesla was doing all these amazing things with electricity, and he is pretty much the person who invented the AC power system, and he should be more recognised than what he really is.
Right. They're trying to portray him as some sort of fantasy.
Well, in the film, it's
a science fiction figure.
Yeah. But if you go into the conspiracy side of things, there are things like the Philadelphia experiment, and they say, oh, Tesla technology was used for that sort of thing. So you get sucked into all these sort of like diversions,
right?
Which is might be true, may or may not be true, but the theory that Tesla was working from is sort of like disappeared. Yeah.
I mean, I think if you look at the things that Tesla invented, stroke discovered, and their application in the real world, I would say they far outshine anything that Einstein came up with.
I would have thought so.
For example, you mentioned the polyphase motor generator and electricity grid system, and many other devices as well.
Yeah.
Einstein, well, would you need relativity if you were going to get into space, do you think?
Well, according to, if you believe in Einstein's relativity, it is very important to you for astronomy and so forth. And he did make these papers on the photoelectric effect, which is supposed to be used, helped in laser technology and so forth. So his theories are supposed to be very important for science as used, but it is kind of bogus in a way, because I don't reckon they're really properly using a lot of Einstein stuff.
Right, and you think that Einstein got certain things wrong as well?
Yeah. Physics, it's been heavily influenced by what Einstein has thought, and he's changed hundreds of things from what it was originally, and so it takes a very long amount of effort to actually study all that. But in conjunction with that 100 years or so worth of Einstein, there's been 100 years worth of criticism on pretty much everything that Einstein did. Right. And so it takes a lot of study just to look at the alternative point of view to Einstein. And I've got here what is called the
95 years of criticism of the special theory of relativity, 1908 to 2003.
Yeah.
Right.
And so they're documenting all the people criticising Einstein, and you've got the catalogue of the topics, if you can see it. It's all these topics of where they think the areas are. Right. And people have looked at each of these things. Einstein's influenced each of these things in his way, and people have looked at what Einstein's done, influenced, and said, oh, there's an error. And so when they count the number of errors, people were claiming it goes into hundreds of hundreds of claims of error. So that's how big Einstein is. People have claimed lots of errors in Einstein's work.
Right. Let's come on to the unified field theory of physics. I'll just give you my sort of broad understanding of what that is. We've got forces in nature, one of which is gravitation. Another force is generated through magnetics or electromagnetic phenomenon, and then you've got forces inside atoms, which is usually termed the strong and weak nuclear forces. So you've got forces appearing in nature which shape the world, and it is believed that there's one underlying phenomenon which connects all of them together, and that is the unified field theory of physics. So, which, if you speak to a modern day physicist, they will say, well, that hasn't been discovered yet. Would you go along with that?
Well, that's roughly it. They've got several candidates which they claim will unify the forces, and the main one I think at the moment is they call it superstring theory, but there's other ones like quantum gravity, quantum loop theory. And so they've got these proposals for unifying the forces, and they've got the three forces like the strong, the weak, and the electromagnetic forces. They've got them unified in the grand unified theory, I think you call it. The problem they find is trying to unify gravity to that, because you're trying to unify Einstein's relativity with quantum physics.
Right. So when you say they've got them unified, there's one equation with all of the different terms in there that represent each force. Would you say?
Well, it'd be complicated equations, with matrices and things.
Right. Yeah. All right.
Keep adding extra bits.
Right. One character that we haven't mentioned yet, Roger, is Boscovich, who lived between 1711 and 1787. And you actually think that Einstein plagiarized some of his discoveries? Or is that too strong a word?
It's probably too strong a word. I'm finding it.
Got his ideas from Boscovich.
I'm finding it very difficult to tie in Boscovich to Einstein. How much did Einstein know about Boscovich? I've got people who were working on the unified field theory with Einstein, because Einstein had a big fight with the establishment over quantum physics. He argued with them that quantum physics was wrong. And while they went off to carry on with quantum physics, he then went off to look for the unified field theory. And those people who were working on the unified field theory were sort of like ignored by the people who were working on the quantum physics. And so I've got the history of these people who are working on the unified field theory, and the people who are working on that, some of them were aware of Boscovich. So it is tied into Einstein's quest for the unified field theory. It's sort of like, it's to the mainstream physics, it's forgotten history.
Right.
It is known in the history of physics department
Boscovich
as an obscure subject. Some people in the history of physics do know about it, but they're a small number of them, and this information doesn't really get sent over to the working physicist people. Okay. There's no communication breakdown in departments.
Right.
The history department thinks if it was important, the physicists would ask me about it, and the physicists think I'm not interested in history.
Right. All right, and Roger, we'll hold it there. We're going to have a short break, and after the break, we're going to explain what it was that Boscovich discovered.